And we're back. All right, today we're going to proceed forward in our story about Kronos and Rhea. But first, we're going to recap a little bit, and I'm going to give you a little bit more of Hesiod's version of the story. Again, this is what I've been reading to you has been in Hesiod's Theogony. I've also been reading to you from the Metamorphoses of Ovid. However, Ovid skips most of this story. And in fact, it was really pretty much just Chaos and Gaia that Ovid had anything to say. He kind of just goes off on other points, and he only really talks about the stories that he feels like talking about. Hesiod, however, Hesiod wrote about the same time that Homer did. That is, Homer and Hesiod are our two first main authors in Greece. And Hesiod and Homer both wrote somewhere in the 800s or 700s BC. Some people think that they might have written as late as the 600s BC. And remember, when it's BC, the numbers go down as time goes forward. So like 800s, then 700s, then 600s. We're not quite sure exactly when Homer or Hesiod wrote. Again, ballpark is somewhere in the 700s BC. Because records aren't really good, and remember that scrolls would get copied and copied and copied, and this kind of poetry, remember Homer and Hesiod write poetry, not prose, like it's in a meter. That kind of writing predates any sort of written history. That is, before you have history, think about your authors like Herodotus and Thucydides that wrote factual history, like events that actually happened. That wouldn't even be invented until a few hundred years later. So we're still kind of like iffy. It's kind of like unknown exactly. So Hesiod's account of the beginning of the universe is one of our best because it's very early, and he actually goes through the very beginning. So before we get into this story in greater detail than I kind of previewed last time, we're going to go back and recap. So we had chaos. In the beginning, there was only chaos, the abyss. But then Gaia, the earth, came into being, her broad bosom the ever-firm foundation of all. I'm going to skip some parts of Hesiod because he gets into the introduction of Tartarus, which is part of the underworld, or is the underworld, or is one of many underworlds, and also several other gods that are just like personified concepts or aspects. That is, the night, the sky, the earth, darkness. Think about things like good and bad. Those are all like concepts that are personified by certain gods. So like love, and day, the air, etc., etc. I'm skipping some of those things because they don't really feature prominently in our story. Earth's first child was Uranus, starry heaven, just her size, a perfect fit on all sides, and a firm foundation for the blessed gods. And then Hesiod goes on to see the creation of mountains, the creation of nymphs, which are a certain type of female goddesses, the creation of the sea, several different sea gods and goddesses. There are many of them. And in Hesiod's version, the Titans actually came before the Hecatonchires and the Cyclopes. And one other thing that Hesiod does is he just lists names of gods. At certain points, there'll be like a list of 50 nymphs, which I'm not going to read for you. But, for example, he lists these gods now: Koios, Krios, Hyperion, Iapetus, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, gold-crowned Phoebe, and lonely Tethys. These are all Titans. Now, you don't need to have that list of names memorized, of course, because most of them are not going to be that important. Now, they have children who are also Titans, so you might have noticed there was no Prometheus in that list. There was no Atlas in that list. They're going to be second-generation Titans, that is, children of Titans. And after them, you might have counted that those were 11. After them, she bore a most terrible child, Kronos, her youngest, an arch deceiver, and this boy hated his lecherous father. She, meaning Gaia, bore the Cyclopes too, with hearts of stone, Brontes, Steropes, and ponderous Arges, who gave Zeus thunder and made the thunderbolt. That's going to happen later after a war happens, so Hesiod sometimes goes out of order. In every other respect, they were just like gods, but a lone eye lay in their forehead's middle. They were nicknamed the Cyclopes because they had a single goggle eye in their forehead's middle, strong as the Dickens, and they knew their craft. Now, if you had a little deja vu there, I did read that paragraph to you like maybe 1 or 2 videos ago. Again, this is a review. And I don't believe I read this paragraph about these guys. And 3 other sons were born to Gaia and Uranus. Strong, hulking creatures that beggar description. Kotos, Briareos, and Gyges. Outrageous children. 100 hands stuck out of their shoulders. Grotesque, and 50 heads grew on each stumpy neck. These monsters exuded irresistible strength. They were Gaia's most dreaded offspring, and from the start, their father feared them and loathed them. Uranus used to stuff all of the children back into a hollow of the earth as soon as they were born, keeping them from the light, an awful thing to do. But heaven, Uranus, did it. And he was very pleased with himself. So again, that's a concept that we really discussed a lot in our earlier videos, and you guys have typed up a bunch of paragraphs about that, about why were they considered monstrous? Why did he hate them? And according to Hesiod, he hated them so much, as soon as he saw them, he stuffed them back in the earth. Again, one of the points I made was you could view this as like a failed experiment. Like the first time you try something, you mess it up, and then you get rid of it, and then you try it again and you do better. Although, remember, according to Hesiod, the Titans came before the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclopes. Another thing you want to remember about Hesiod is, as one of the very first authors, he didn't have an editor. That is, he's going to be really inconsistent with himself, and it's kind of surprising because Homer, who wrote about the same time as he did, Homer's plots are a lot more solid. Like there's a lot less that you can be like, why did that happen, or that doesn't make sense, or that contradicts that. Hesiod will contradict himself a lot, and it's probably because the vagueness of these early stories, that is, they're very kind of amorphic and abstract. Again, using your imagination. It's kind of necessary to use your imagination, because if you take it literally, you'll be like, that doesn't make sense, or that contradicts something that he just said. And in fact, Hesiod contradicts himself a lot. Like, almost every page has some contradiction to something he said. Okay. Vast Earth. Okay, so the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclopes have been put back inside Gaia by Uranus, their father. Vast Earth groaned under the pressure inside. And then she came up with a plan. All right, so this is Gaia's plan. A really wicked trick. She created a new mineral, flint, gray flint, which is like a stone, and formed a huge sickle from it and showed it to her dear boys. Okay, so now we're talking about the Titans. Remember that the Titans, there's 12 of them, Kronos, their leader, the strongest one of them, that they look like people. That is, they're going to appear like the Olympians do, like really, really overpowered, superpowered humans. We consider them gods because the Greeks called them gods, but they're not monstrous gods, although the Titans are considered to be very large. But remember, gods like the Titans and the Olympians can change their shape when they need to. Okay, so Gaia now is speaking to the Titans led by Kronos. She rallied them with this bitter speech. Listen to me, children, and we might yet get even with your criminal father for what he has done to us. After all, he started this whole ugly business. So Gaia makes it clear that she doesn't like this idea. That is, Uranus looked at the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires and thought they were monstrous, so he put them back in the earth. which here is phrased as locking them up in the underworld. Now you might be wondering, well, what about Tartarus? What about Hades? Where is the underworld? The Greeks have many different versions of that concept. So is it inside the earth or is it underneath the earth? That's something we'll kind of talk about as time goes on. Okay. Now we're talking about the Titans again, led by Kronos. They were tongue-tied with fear when they heard this. But Kronos, whose mind worked in strange ways, got his pluck up and found the words to answer her. I think I might be able to bring it off, Mother. I can't stand Father. He doesn't even deserve the name. And after all, he started this whole ugly business. This response warmed the heart of the vast earth, Gaia. She hid young Kronos in an ambush and placed in his hands the jagged sickle. So this makes it look like a farming implement. And what a sickle is, it's something that you can, it's on one hand, and you could reap, that is, cut down like corn or wheat with it. It's not a scythe. A scythe, like what the Grim Reaper has, is this giant thing that can like really get down a lot of crops. A sickle, you can only get like one crop at a time. Again, a farming implement. And remember, Kronos' Latin version Saturn was considered an agricultural god that was worshipped by the ancient Romans. Whereas Kronos, as a Titan, the Greeks didn't have temples to the Titans. The Titans are, spoiler alert, the Titans are going to lose in a war that's coming up. All right. She hid young Kronos in an ambush and placed in his hands the jagged sickle. Then she went over the whole plan with him. Okay, and I'm going to leave it off there because Hesiod's version gets a little graphic and a little gruesome about the damage that Kronos does to Uranus. Hacks him apart. So now Kronos is in power. And this is going to be the next part of the story. But up to this point, you've only been writing some short paragraphs on the early stuff. And today you're going to do all of that leading up to this in a lengthier version. All right. So again, if you've fallen a little bit behind, no problem. Remember, you can watch the old videos and submit your assignments late. All right. Have a good one.